This video is all about UI events in Unity. And what we mean by an event is the user has done something. They have clicked on a button, they have toggled a toggle, they have moved a slider. That creates an event, and we can then do things in response to that event. So when the user clicks a button, we can load a scene, or we can change things. When user clicks a toggle, we can react to that. And we're going to see how to do that. So I've set up a very simple Unity scene. In the scene, I've set up a cube, and then I've set up a very simple UI, and we're going to do stuff to the cube when the user interacts with the UI. And the way that events work, whenever you create, say, a button element or any interactable element, down at the bottom of that component, you can have what to do with that event. So in this case, when the user clicks, on click, what do you want to do? Right now, nothing is happening. We have the same thing for this toggle. Whenever the value of the toggle changes, what do we want to do? And likewise for this slider. Whenever the value changes of the slider, what do we want to do? So we're going to start with the button, which is the simplest one. And what we need to do is we need to add a listener of this event. Something is going to listen for the event. And we do that by clicking this plus down at the bottom. And this is a single listener. We can actually have multiple things listening for this event, and we can remove things with the minus. Now there's nothing in here yet, so it doesn't do anything. We need to tell it, first of all, what game object wants to be listening for this event. So I want my cube to listen for this. Now that I do that, this drop-down becomes active, and now I need to decide on that cube which component wants to listen for that event. And we have five different components on this cube. We have the transform, the cube, mesh filter, the mesh renderer, the script that I've created, and this box collider. So we can access any of the methods or any of the variables on any of these components. And it's important to remember that each component is a script at the end of the day. Each component has methods and it has variables that we can access. And that's how events work. So we're going to go back to this button, and we got to choose what we want to do. So for instance, we could go to the mesh filter, and we could change different properties of the mesh filter. We could go down to the box collider, and a collider is what makes this box physical. It makes things be able to hit this box. So for instance, it has an enabled property. And what I could do is I could set this enabled property every time that we click on this button. So yeah, let's do that for a second. What happens when we pull that up is we see that we have this checkbox because enabled is a Boolean. Enabled is a true or false value. So when I click, I'm going to call on my cube the box collider, and I'm going to set enabled to false. If I check this, then every click, I'm going to go to the cube, I'm going to find the box collider, I'm going to set enabled to true. Now this does not flip, it will not toggle between, because our event that we're passing doesn't have a true-false value, it's just a click. So every time I click, I'm going to turn this on, or every time I click, I'm going to turn this off. So let's change this to something that we can see very easily. We're still going to use the cube, but we're going to go to the game object, and we're going to set the name of the game object. So every time that I click, I set the name to clicked. And now we're ready to go. If I hit play in Unity, and then I click this button, watch over here in the hierarchy, and you'll see that the cube is now called clicked. And if I hit the button again, it doesn't do anything. It reset the name to clicked. If I hit it again, it keeps resetting the name to clicked. And we can see that. If I go in here and I change this, and then I hit the button, it changes it back to click. So we have successfully hooked up our button to our game object, and we set the name to clicked. That's not very exciting. We may want to do something a little bit more involved, and that's where we need to turn to code. So in the same way that I can call a method on, say, the box collider, I can call a method on a script that I've created. And I have created this cube script. And lo and behold, I have created a method for this cube script called do stuff when clicked. And we have to decide what we want to do. There's a lot of things that we could do here. How about we rotate the cube a little bit? So in my cube script, I'm going to access the transform of my cube, and I'm going to look through, and if I start typing, I'm going to look for, say, rotate. So I want to apply a rotation of a certain amount of degrees, or I can do rotate around. I want to rotate around an axis. Don't worry about this too much. Let me just put in some code. So we're going to rotate around the up axis, and we'll rotate by, say, 10 degrees. This is an old method. It says deprecated. That's why it's giving me this warning, but it will still work fine. So if I pop back to Unity, and I then hit play. Oh, no, before I hit play, I need to go back to the button and I need to tell it to call this. So in addition to changing the name, I also, on my cube, want to call the cube script, and I want to do stuff when clicked. That's that method. So when I now hit play, every time I click the button, it is going to change the name and rotate the cube a little bit. Neat. Okay, so from there, let's get a little bit more complex. So a button only has a single thing that happens. It just has an event when it's clicked. But a toggle is variable. Every time you toggle the toggle, it's either going to on or to off. So you'll note that when we look at our button, we just have on click. But when we look at our toggle, we have on value changed Boolean. That means that we can call a method and we can pass a Boolean value. And that value is, have I turned the toggle on or have I turned the toggle off? And then we can respond to that accordingly. So what can we do with a toggle? Well, one thing we can do is we can toggle a game object on and off, right? We know how to turn an object on and off. Let's do that every time someone toggles, and let's do it based on the state of the toggle. So I'm going to add a listener. The listener is my cube, and this time I'm going to go into GameObject, and note that we have this dynamic section up at the top. That means that these are methods or properties of the object that can take a dynamic Boolean, and we're going to have a dynamic Boolean. So I'm going to go to my GameObject and I'm going to go to set active, and note that this time there's no checkbox. And what that means is when I toggle off, it's going to call set active and it's going to set it to false. When I toggle back on, it's going to call set active and it's going to set it to true. And let's see that real quick. So if I hit play and I click on my toggle, the GameObject turns off and it turns back on. And this now we're starting to get to more interesting behavior. We can also call things in scripts. So I have a public void do stuff when toggled, and note that this time we're passing it an on or an off. This will be true when we toggle on, and it'll be false when we toggle off. So we could do a lot of things with this. How about we toggle the color between two colors? So I am going to do get component, and we're going to take a look at the mesh renderer, and we're going to take that material and the color of the material. So if I have turned it on, then I'm going to set the color equal to, let's say, color.red. Otherwise, I've turned it off, then I'm going to have all this same code, but this time I'm going to turn it to, say, green. If I save this, I pop back over to Unity, I let that compile real quick, and I hit play. Then every time we toggle the toggle, oh, well, first of all, we have to change it so it's no longer turning the game object on and off. So I'm going to select this, I'm going to hit minus. I now am going to, on the cube, call my cube script, and I'm going to do stuff when toggled. When I hit play, each time that I toggle, I change the color of my cube. And I think you can see how this can quickly get very powerful, how you can do a lot without a lot of code, really just a couple of lines of code. So the last thing let's look at is a slider. And in the same way that our toggle passed a Boolean value, our slider is going to pass a float value. It's going to pass a fraction between 0 on the left and 1 on the right. And you can see that here. Single, by the way, is just a fancier word for float. A floating point number, a single precision number, these mean the same thing. there are no default values this time that I can change. So previously we just took in the cube and we would like change the game object name. There aren't any parameters on, say, our cube box collider or our mesh renderer or our transform that take a single number. There's some that take a vector 3 that take 3 numbers, but there's nothing that takes a single number. So we're going to need a script this time. So let's go ahead and open up the script, and that's this third method that I've created. So it accepts a float value, and we are going to set the position of the cube relative to that value that's passed in. So we're going to need a vector 3, and that's going to be our position. And we're going to move it, say, in the x. We're going to move it left to right. So the x position is going to be that value, and then we'll just keep the y and the z at 0. Oops, and I need to make this a new vector 3. Then we're going to apply that. So transform.position is equal to this position that I just created from the value. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to pop back over to Unity, and then I am going to go to the slider, and I'm going to add a listener. The cube is going to be listening, and on the cube, our cube script, and lo and behold, we have a dynamic float. So we have a method that you can pass a dynamic float value and it will do stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And when I hit play, then as I toggle, I'm actually going to be moving my cube in the scene. And all of these things work in tandem. So we can do quite a lot, again, with just a few lines of code in Unity by using the event system that comes with all of the different UI elements. And by the way, each of these elements has a default event. So the button has a click event, the slider has a value changed. If you need other events, like say I want to do something when I first hover over the button, you can actually add custom event types. And you do that by adding an additional component. So we down to the bottom, and we're going to search for an event trigger. And that allows us to add a new event type to our button. So for instance, say when the pointer enters, when you move the mouse pointer over the button, then what do we want to do? Let's change the button name. So we're going to go back to GameObject.name, and we'll set it to hovered, because now we're hovering over the button. So if I go ahead and hit play, then each time that I hover over the button, note that it immediately changed that name to hovered, and then when I click, it changes it to click. Hovered and clicked. Neat. So as you can see, there's a lot of power, and I wish you good luck in finding cool things to do from the UI events in Unity's UI system.